The remarkable thing about this story is really not even so much that the trees were cut, but that after the trees were cut, there was a general consensus of everyone involved that it was a mistake. And there are very few places in Georgia where that would have happened. So about 2 weeks ago, Trees Columbus received a call about some tree cutting going on along US 80. You know, of course, that was of interest because the trees planted along US 80 are protected under state law.
We started receiving calls from citizens and local, environmental groups concerned about the magnitude of the cutting. And we made some calls. First of all, it was reported that it was city cutting or perhaps DOT cutting. And so, of course, I made calls to determine if it was us and learned pretty quickly it had been a private permit. I was able to contact Russell McMurray, who's the commissioner of the DOT, and I've just happened to know him for 10 years. I had his cell phone number, and so I was able to get in touch with him, and he immediately looked into it. At that point, we knew that it had been a private permit cut and approved by the DOT, and we knew we needed to get together immediately because the city had a completely different interpretation about whether any permit could ever have been issued. We have specific beautification projects that were independently permitted back in the 90s and were paid for with largely private funds, and those were expressly excluded from any billboard cutting, any property owner cutting, any sort of permitting.
There's the cutting of about 330 yards along the right-of-way on the highway side of the fence. There also looks to be a 10-15 foot buffer on the Columbus Park crossing side of the fence that was clear cut as well.
Yes.
Is that in violation?
Yes, that would be in violation of the Uniform Development Ordinance. And the reason why is because when property is developed, and it was developed, this is a new, relatively new owner, it was developed by another entity, but nevertheless, when property is developed, it's developed with a specific representation that you will maintain certain, what we call TDUs, tree density units, and certain buffers. That's how you get the zoning, that's how you get the permitting, or those types of agreements. So whenever we have a circumstance like this where either people forget or their contractor didn't know or whatever the circumstance may be, that is an ordinance. There's usually always a citation issued, and then of course there has to be some sort of remediation.
So the second thing that's so remarkable about this situation is that these trees will be replanted, and the city is working with all the other involved parties in this cutting. They're in discussions, which is also remarkable. Not only did everyone say this was a mistake, but are sitting down and figuring out, okay, how do we fix it? The mistake could have been a lot bigger. The mistake could have been a lot bigger.